Marcus felt the eyes burning into his back as he moved through the electronics section. The security guard's footsteps echoed his own, a shadow that had followed him for 3 hours through every store, every corridor, every turn in the sprawling mall. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his worn jacket, the weight of suspicion crushing down on his shoulders. The guard's radio crackled. Other shoppers stole glances. Marcus had endured this dance of humiliation before, but today felt different. Today felt final. 6 months later, Marcus stood in that same corridor, but everything had changed. The security guard who had followed him now approached with slow, uncertain steps. The man's face had drained of all color as he stared at the brass nameplate that had just been mounted on the wall. His hands shook as he read the words that would change everything he thought he knew. Marcus watched him, waiting for recognition to fully dawn, waiting for the moment when the hunter would realize he had been stalking the owner of his own hunting ground. What country are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, and if these stories inspire you, feel free to subscribe. The morning had started like any other Tuesday for Marcus Williams. He pulled his 15-year-old Honda into the parking garage of Riverside Mall, the same mall where his grandmother had once cleaned floors in the early hours before dawn. The irony wasn't lost on him as he walked through the main entrance, past the fountain where he'd thrown pennies as a child, wishing for things that seemed impossible then. At 34, Marcus carried himself with quiet dignity, despite the weight of recent loss. His grandmother's funeral had been 2 weeks ago, and the lawyers were still sorting through her estate. She had been a woman of secrets, it turned out. A woman who had cleaned those floors while quietly investing every spare dollar, every tip, every small windfall into something larger than anyone had imagined. But today, Marcus just needed to buy a phone charger. His had broken that morning, and he had meetings all afternoon for his consulting business. He wore jeans and a navy pullover, nothing fancy, nothing that should have drawn attention. Yet as soon as he stepped into the electronics store, he felt it, that familiar prickle of being watched. The security guard was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his 40s, with close-cropped graying hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every movement. His name tag read Dave Morrison, and beneath it, 15 years of service. Dave had positioned himself near the entrance, arms crossed, trying to look casual but failing completely. Marcus had experienced this before. The slow pursuit through stores, the assumption of guilt, the exhausting dance of proving his right to exist in spaces where his presence was questioned. He could have left. He could have driven to another mall, another store, another city even. But something in him refused to run anymore. So he shopped. Methodically, carefully. He picked up the charger he needed, examined phone cases he didn't want, looked at tablets he couldn't afford. And with every step, Dave Morrison followed. The other shoppers began to notice. An elderly white woman clutched her purse tighter as Marcus passed. A young couple whispered to each other, their eyes darting between Marcus and the security guard. A group of teenagers started following the spectacle, their phones out, sensing drama. "Can I help you find something specific?" Dave finally asked, his voice carrying the weight of authority and suspicion. Marcus turned slowly, his dark eyes meeting Dave's pale blue ones. "Just browsing, thank you. Been browsing for quite a while now. Is there a time limit I should be aware of?" Dave's jaw tightened. "Just keeping an eye on things. Part of the job." "I see." Marcus's voice remained steady, but inside his heart pounded with a mixture of anger and exhaustion. "And what things are those exactly?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Dave's radio crackled to life, another security guard's voice reporting something mundane from across the mall. The sound seemed to embolden him. "Look, I've been doing this for 15 years. I know when something doesn't look right." And what exactly doesn't look right? Dave couldn't answer, or wouldn't, because the truth, that Marcus's presence itself was what didn't look right to him, was something he couldn't say out loud. Not in 2023, not with phones recording everything, not with his job on the line. But Marcus knew. He had always known. The dance continued. Marcus moved to the sporting goods store. Dave followed. Marcus browsed clothes. Dave lingered nearby, pretending to study a directory. Marcus sat on a bench and checked his own phone, calling his assistant to postpone his afternoon meetings. Dave positioned himself across the corridor, radio in hand, eyes never leaving his target. 3 hours passed this way. 3 hours of humiliation, of whispered conversations, of building tension. Other security guards began to take notice, drawn by Dave's radio chatter and the growing crowd of onlookers. Some shoppers filmed discreetly, sensing a viral moment in the making. Marcus felt the familiar weight of his ancestors' struggles settling on his shoulders. His grandmother's stories of cleaning these floors while being treated as invisible, of working double shifts to pay for his mother's education, of sacrificing everything for a family that faced closed doors and clenched fists wherever they went. But his grandmother had also taught him something else. She had taught him patience. She had taught him that dignity was something you carried inside, something that no one could take from you unless you let them. And she had taught him that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice was simply to endure it with grace until the truth revealed itself. As the afternoon sun slanted through the mall's skylights, casting long shadows across the polished floors, Marcus made his way to the customer service desk, not to complain, not yet, but to make a simple inquiry. Dave, of course, followed. "Excuse me," Marcus said to the young woman behind the counter, her name tag reading Sarah, Manager in Training. "I was wondering if you could help me find the mall's administrative offices." Sarah looked between Marcus and the security guard, who had positioned himself obviously nearby. The tension was palpable now, drawing stares from everyone in the vicinity. May I ask what you need them for?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time that day, it reached his eyes. "I have some business to discuss with management." "Property business?" Dave stepped closer, his hand moving to his radio. "Is there a problem here?" Sarah looked uncomfortable, clearly sensing she was in the middle of something bigger than a simple customer service interaction. "Sir, if you have a complaint about—" "Oh, I'm not complaining," Marcus interrupted gently. "Not yet, anyway. I just need to speak with whoever's in charge of property management. It's regarding the ownership transition." The words hung in the air like a riddle. Sarah blinked, confusion evident on her face. Dave's grip on his radio tightened. "Ownership transition?" Sarah repeated. Marcus nodded, reaching into his jacket pocket. Dave's entire body tensed, his hand moving to his belt. But Marcus withdrew only a business card, placing it gently on the counter. "Marcus Williams, Williams Property Holdings. I believe there should be some paperwork waiting for me." Sarah picked up the card, her eyes widening as she read it. She looked at Marcus, then at Dave, then back at the card. Her face went pale. Oh my God. Mr. Williams, let me get my manager. Right away." She practically ran to the back office, leaving Marcus and Dave in a moment of suspended silence. Around them, the crowd of onlookers had grown, phones raised, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Dave's radio crackled again. This time it was his supervisor. "Dave, what's your status on that suspicious individual?" Marcus heard the words clearly. So did everyone else in the growing crowd. The phrase "suspicious individual" echoed through the space like an accusation, laying bare the assumptions that had driven the entire afternoon's humiliation. Dave looked at Marcus, really looked at him for the first time. He saw the quiet dignity in the man's posture, the expensive watch on his wrist that he had somehow missed before, the business card that Sarah had clutched like it contained explosive information. "Dave?" The radio crackled again. "You there?" Dave's hand hovered over the radio, but he didn't respond. He couldn't, because something was shifting in his understanding, something fundamental and uncomfortable. Sarah returned, nearly running, with an older man in a suit trailing behind her. The man's face was flushed, his breathing labored as if he had been rushing through the mall's administrative corridors. "Mr. Williams?" The man extended his hand, his voice slightly breathless. "I'm Tom Bradley, General Manager. I am so sorry for the delay. We've been expecting you, but we weren't sure when you would be coming by." Marcus shook the offered hand calmly. "I mentioned I might stop by this week. I wanted to see the property for myself before we finalize the transition." Tom Bradley's eyes darted nervously between Marcus and Dave, who stood frozen beside them. The crowd had grown larger now, a semicircle of curious onlookers capturing every moment on their phones. Of course. Would you like to start with a tour of the management offices? We have all the documentation ready for your review." "Actually," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet corridor, "I think I'd like to address something first." He turned to face Dave directly, and in that moment, the security guard seemed to shrink before him. The hunter had become the hunted. The watcher had become the watched. "Officer Morrison, isn't it?" Dave nodded mutely, his 15 years of service suddenly feeling very small and very fragile. "You've been following me for 3 hours now, watching me, cataloging my movements, radioing my location to your colleagues." Marcus's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. "You called me a suspicious individual to your supervisor." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of murmur and shifting feet among the onlookers. Dave's face flushed red, then drained to white. I was just doing my job, sir." "Your job?" Marcus repeated softly. "And what exactly did you suspect me of doing, Officer Morrison?" The question hung in the air unanswered because Dave knew, they all knew, that there was no good answer. There had been no suspicious behavior, no evidence of wrongdoing, nothing but the color of Marcus's skin and the assumptions that came with it. Tom Bradley stepped forward, his voice nervous and urgent. "Mr. Williams, I assure you that this isn't representative of our usual—" Marcus held up a gentle hand, stopping the manager mid-sentence. His eyes never left Dave's face. "I spent 3 hours being followed through every store in this mall. 3 hours being watched like a criminal. 3 hours being treated as if my presence here was somehow wrong, somehow threatening." His voice grew quieter, which somehow made it more powerful. "Do you know what that feels like, Officer Morrison?" Dave opened his mouth, but no words came. Around them, the silence was complete, except for the soft hum of the mall's ventilation system and the distant sound of a child laughing somewhere in the food court. "My grandmother cleaned these floors," Marcus continued, his eyes taking in the polished tiles beneath their feet. "Every morning at 5 a.m. before the stores opened. Before people like you arrived to watch people like me, she saved every penny, invested every small windfall, built something larger than anyone imagined. And now," he gestured to Tom Bradley, who stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "Would you like to tell him, Tom? Or should I?" Tom Bradley cleared his throat, his voice barely above a whisper. "As of last month, Mr. Williams owns 68% of Riverside Mall. He's our new primary stakeholder." The words hit Dave like a physical blow. His legs seemed to give way slightly, and he reached out to steady himself against a nearby pillar. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Gasps, murmurs, the rapid-fire clicking of phones capturing every moment. Marcus watched Dave's face cycle through emotions. Disbelief, recognition, horror, shame. It was the same face Marcus had seen countless times before, in different contexts, different places, but always with the same fundamental moment of reckoning. "So when you were following the suspicious individual," Marcus said, his voice still impossibly calm, "you were actually following your boss." Dave's radio crackled one more time. His supervisor's voice cut through the tension. "Dave, headquarters wants a report on that situation. What's the status?" Marcus looked at the radio, then back at Dave. "Would you like to tell him? Or should I?" Dave's hand trembled as he lifted the radio. His voice cracked as he spoke. Situation resolved. No issues to report." But Marcus shook his head gently. "Oh, I think there are quite a few issues to report, actually." Tom Bradley stepped forward again, desperation clear in his voice. "Mr. Williams, please. I know this looks terrible, but Officer Morrison is one of our most experienced security personnel. 15 years of service, excellent record. I'm sure this was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that what we're calling it?" He walked slowly toward Dave, who seemed rooted to the spot. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a clear path between them. "Officer Morrison, in your 15 years of experience, how many white customers have you followed for 3 hours straight?" Dave's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "How many white customers have you radioed about as suspicious individuals for the crime of shopping while looking different than you expected?" Still no answer. "How many white customers have you assumed were criminals simply because they walked into your mall?" The silence stretched so long that Marcus wondered if Dave would ever speak again. When the words finally came, they were barely audible. I made an assumption. I was wrong." "You made an assumption," Marcus repeated. "About what exactly?" Dave's shoulders sagged. Around them, the crowd pressed closer, phones raised, capturing every moment of what was clearly becoming a reckoning. I thought, Dave's voice broke. "I thought you didn't belong here." The admission hung in the air like a confession, raw and painful and undeniably true. Marcus nodded slowly, as if he had been waiting all afternoon to hear those exact words. "And why did you think I didn't belong here, Officer Morrison?" Dave couldn't answer, or wouldn't. The truth was too ugly to speak aloud even now. Marcus turned to address Tom Bradley, but his voice carried clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Tom, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about one security guard making one mistake. This is about a culture, a system, a set of assumptions that allow people to be treated as criminals simply for existing in spaces where others don't expect to see them." Tom nodded frantically. "Absolutely, Mr. Williams. We'll implement new training programs immediately. Sensitivity training, bias awareness, whatever you think is appropriate." "That's a start," Marcus said. But first, I want to understand how deep this goes. He turned back to Dave, who stood like a man awaiting judgment. Officer Morrison, I want you to walk me through your thought process this afternoon, step by step. I want to understand exactly what led you to spend 3 hours treating me like a criminal. Dave's face crumpled. The weight of 15 years of service, of a steady paycheck, of a pension plan and health insurance for his family, all of it balanced precariously on this moment. When you walked in, he said slowly, his voice thick with shame, you looked around like you were checking the place out, like you were planning something. Planning something, Marcus repeated. Like what? I don't know. Theft, maybe. Or worse. And what about my behavior suggested theft to you? Dave struggled to find an answer that wouldn't damn him further. You took your time. You looked at things without buying them. You seemed nervous. I seemed nervous. Marcus's voice carried a note of bitter irony. And did it occur to you, Officer Morrison, that I might have seemed nervous because I could feel you watching me? Because I've experienced this particular dance before? The crowd murmured its agreement. Several people nodded knowingly, recognizing their own experiences in Marcus's words. No, sir? Dave whispered. It didn't occur to me. Marcus walked closer to Dave, close enough that their conversation became more intimate, more personal. The crowd strained to hear. I want you to imagine something for me, Officer Morrison. I want you to imagine walking into a store and being watched from the moment you enter. Imagine being followed from section to section, aisle to aisle, with the clear understanding that someone thinks you're a criminal. Imagine that feeling lasting not for minutes, but for hours. Imagine knowing that everyone around you is watching the spectacle, making assumptions about who you are and why you're there. Dave's eyes were red-rimmed now. Whether from shame or unshed tears, Marcus couldn't tell. Can you imagine that feeling, Officer Morrison? Yes, sir, Dave whispered. I can. And how do you think that would make you feel? Dave's voice cracked completely. Angry, humiliated, like I didn't matter, like I wasn't human. Marcus nodded slowly. That's exactly how it feels. That's how I felt this afternoon. That's how I felt in countless stores, countless malls, countless spaces where my presence was treated as an inherent threat. He turned to address the crowd that had gathered, his voice carrying clearly across the corridor. This isn't just my story. This is the story of every black person, every person of color, every person who has been made to feel like an intruder in spaces they have every right to occupy. This is about the assumptions we make, the biases we carry, the systems that allow discrimination to flourish under the guise of security and safety. The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. Phones captured not just the confrontation, but the education happening in real time. Marcus turned back to Tom Bradley. Tom, I want you to pull the security footage from this afternoon. All of it. I want you to review Officer Morrison's conduct, but more importantly, I want you to use it as a training tool. I want every security officer, every manager, every employee in this mall to watch what happened today and understand why it was wrong. Tom nodded eagerly. Of course, Mr. Williams, absolutely. And I want you to implement a zero-tolerance policy for racial profiling, not just in word, but in practice. Regular training, accountability measures, consequences for violations. Yes, sir. Whatever you think is appropriate. Marcus looked around at the crowd, at the phones recording every moment, at the faces that would carry this story far beyond the walls of Riverside Mall. But most importantly, he said, his voice rising slightly, I want this to be a moment of learning, not just punishment. Officer Morrison made a terrible mistake, but he's not evil. He's a product of the same biases and assumptions that we all carry to some degree. The question is what we do with that recognition. He turned back to Dave, who stood waiting for a verdict that would determine his future. Officer Morrison, do you understand what you did wrong today? Yes, sir, Dave said, his voice stronger now. I profiled you. I made assumptions based on your race. I treated you like a criminal without any evidence of wrongdoing. And do you understand why that was wrong? Because it's illegal, because it's immoral, because it's exactly the kind of discrimination that this country is supposed to be moving past. Marcus studied Dave's face for a long moment, looking for something. Sincerity, maybe, or the possibility of genuine change. Officer Morrison, do you have children? The question seemed to catch Dave off guard. Yes, sir. 2 daughters, 16 and 14. And what would you want them to learn from this situation? Dave considered the question carefully, perhaps understanding that his answer would determine not just his own fate, but the lesson that would be passed down to the next generation. I'd want them to learn that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. I'd want them to understand that making assumptions about people based on their appearance is wrong, and that when you make mistakes like that, you own up to them and work to do better. Marcus nodded slowly. And are you prepared to do that work, Officer Morrison? Are you prepared to examine your own biases, to learn about the experiences of people who don't look like you, to become part of the solution instead of part of the problem? Yes, sir, Dave said without hesitation. I am. Marcus looked around at the crowd one more time, then at Tom Bradley, then back at Dave. The weight of the moment settled over them all like a blanket, heavy with possibility and responsibility. Then here's what's going to happen, Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of ownership and the wisdom of experience. Officer Morrison, you're going to keep your job, but you're going to earn it back. You're going to undergo comprehensive bias training. You're going to study the history of racial profiling and its impact on communities of color. You're going to speak at training sessions for other security personnel, sharing what happened today and what you learned from it. Dave nodded eagerly, relief flooding his face. And most importantly, Marcus continued, you're going to become an advocate. When you see other security personnel engaging in the same behavior you exhibited today, you're going to speak up. You're going to be part of the solution. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Marcus turned to Tom Bradley. Tom, I want monthly reports on the implementation of new policies. I want data on security stops, complaints, and incidents. I want transparency and accountability at every level. You'll have it, Mr. Williams. And I want to establish a community advisory board with representatives from various communities throughout the city to provide ongoing oversight and feedback on mall policies and procedures. Excellent idea. Marcus looked around at the crowd one final time, his eyes taking in the faces of people who had witnessed something unprecedented. A moment of accountability and possibility in the midst of what could have been just another story of discrimination and injustice. To everyone who's been watching this unfold, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the corridor, I want you to understand that this isn't just about one mall or one security guard. This is about all of us. This is about the assumptions we make, the biases we carry, the systems we allow to perpetuate inequality. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the crowd. But it's also about the possibility of change. It's about the power we all have to choose dignity over discrimination, understanding over assumption, justice over prejudice. What happened here today can happen anywhere, in any context, whenever people choose to confront bias and work towards something better. The crowd began to disperse slowly, people talking quietly among themselves, phones still recording, the story already beginning to spread beyond the walls of Riverside Mall. But Marcus wasn't finished. He walked back to Dave, who stood alone now, the weight of the afternoon's events clear on his face. Officer Morrison, Marcus said quietly, there's something else I want you to understand. Dave looked up, uncertainty in his eyes. My grandmother spent 30 years cleaning these floors, 30 years being treated as invisible, as less than, by people who never bothered to see her as human. She saved every penny from those years, invested it wisely, built something that would last beyond her lifetime. Marcus's voice grew softer, more personal. She died 2 weeks ago, and she left me this mall, among other things. But more than that, she left me a responsibility to make sure that no one else has to experience what she experienced, what I experienced today. Dave nodded, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. So when I tell you that you can keep your job, when I tell you that this can be a moment of learning rather than punishment, I'm not just being generous. I'm honoring her memory. I'm choosing to believe that people can change, that systems can improve, that we can build something better together. Dave's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Williams, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything right now. Marcus replied gently. Just do the work. Show up differently tomorrow than you did today. That's all any of us can do. As the crowd finally dispersed and the normal sounds of the mall began to return, Marcus stood in the same corridor where he had been hunted just hours before. The transformation was complete, not just in his circumstances, but in the understanding of everyone who had witnessed what had unfolded. Tom Bradley approached hesitantly. Mr. Williams, would you still like that tour of the management offices? Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he had allowed himself all day. Yes, Tom. I think it's time I saw the rest of my grandmother's legacy. As they walked toward the administrative offices, Marcus's phone buzzed with notifications. The story was already spreading across social media, the video clips already being shared and discussed. But Marcus knew that the real impact wouldn't be measured in views or shares. It would be measured in the moments when other people chose dignity over discrimination, understanding over assumption, justice over prejudice. The mall continued to bustle around them, shoppers moving through their routines, children laughing at the play area, teenagers gathering around the food court. It looked the same as it had that morning, but Marcus knew that something fundamental had shifted, not just in his own circumstances, but in the understanding of everyone who had been present for the reckoning. 6 months later, Marcus stood in his grandmother's old apartment, packing the last of her belongings. The walls were covered with photographs, family gatherings, graduations, achievements small and large. But there was one photograph that caught his attention, one he had never noticed before. It was a picture of his grandmother as a young woman, standing in front of Riverside Mall on its opening day in 1987. She was wearing her cleaning uniform, holding a mop and bucket, but she was smiling. On the back of the photograph, in her careful handwriting, were the words, "Someday this place will know our worth." Marcus held the photograph for a long moment, understanding finally dawning. His grandmother hadn't just cleaned those floors for 30 years. She had been studying them, learning them, preparing for something bigger. Every investment, every sacrifice, every moment of humiliation she had endured had been building toward this moment. The mall that had once treated her as invisible now bore her legacy. The security policies had been completely overhauled. Dave Morrison had become one of the most effective advocates for bias training in the company, sharing his story at conferences and training sessions across the country. The Community Advisory Board met monthly, providing ongoing oversight and feedback. But more than that, the story had spread far beyond Riverside Mall. Videos of the confrontation had gone viral, sparking conversations about racial profiling, bias, and the power of accountability. Other malls, other businesses, other institutions had begun examining their own policies and practices. Marcus's phone rang, interrupting his reverie. It was Dave Morrison. "Mr. Williams? I hope I'm not bothering you." "Not at all, Dave. What's going on?" "I wanted to let you know that we had another incident today. A young Latino man was being followed by one of our newer security guards. But this time it was different." Marcus waited, listening. 3 other guards intervened immediately. They recognized what was happening and stopped it before it could escalate. The young man never even knew he was being profiled because the situation was corrected so quickly. Marcus smiled. "That's exactly what we were hoping for, but that's not why I called." Dave continued, "I wanted to thank you again, not just for giving me a second chance, but for showing me how to be better. My daughters are proud of the work I'm doing now. They're proud of the man I've become." After hanging up, Marcus walked through the empty apartment one more time. In a few hours, new tenants would move in, and this space would begin a new chapter. But the lessons learned, the changes implemented, the growth achieved, those would continue. He locked the door behind him and walked to his car, the same 15-year-old Honda he had driven that day 6 months ago. As he pulled out of the parking garage, he passed Riverside Mall, its evening lights just beginning to flicker on. Through the large windows, he could see families shopping together, teenagers hanging out, elderly couples walking hand in hand. It looked like any other mall on any other evening, but Marcus knew better. He knew that within those walls, something important was happening. People were being treated with dignity. Assumptions were being challenged. Biases were being confronted. His grandmother's legacy lived on, not just in the ownership documents or the financial investments, but in the daily choice to treat every person who walked through those doors as worthy of respect and consideration. As Marcus drove home, he thought about the power of second chances, the possibility of transformation, and the responsibility that comes with both. His grandmother had spent 30 years preparing for a moment she would never see, building something that would outlast her own lifetime. Now it was his turn to build something that would last, something that would honor not just her memory, but the memory of everyone who had been made to feel less than human, simply for existing in spaces where others didn't expect to see them. The story that had begun with assumptions and ended with accountability was just the beginning. The real work, the daily choice to see the humanity in every person, to challenge bias wherever it appeared, to build systems that served everyone equally, that work would continue for as long as people were willing to do it. And Marcus was willing. His grandmother had taught him that change was possible, that dignity was worth fighting for, and that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice was simply to outlast it with grace and determination. The mall lights faded in his rearview mirror, but the lessons learned within its walls would continue to shine, guiding future generations toward a more just and equitable world. His grandmother's floors had become the foundation for something larger than she could have imagined, but exactly what she had always hoped for. In the end, that was her greatest investment of all, not in buildings or businesses, but in the possibility that her grandson would have the chance to walk through any door with his head held high, knowing that he belonged wherever he chose to go. The transformation was complete, but the story continued, spreading outward like ripples on still water, touching lives and changing hearts in ways that would be felt for generations to come.